I see that a lot of people are very angry at the Bush administration. I'm not here particularly to defend the Bush administration, but I was asked by the minority. I want to add, or try to add, a little bit of perspective to this. I think a number of previous people testifying have suggested that not just that the war in Iraq was a mistake, but that there was some kind of conspiracy to take the nation into a war for no good reason at all, and that this was done knowingly. People who believe that, it seems to me, shouldn't be wasting time on FISA. They shouldn't be wasting time on secondary issues. That is an extraordinary explosive charge if you think it's really true that the president knowingly and deliberately sent the country into a war for reasons which he knew were untrue. We should just zero right in on that and have a debate about that. Unfortunately, I don't know that that's right. I think that's wildly improbable, but that's what we should be talking about. And it doesn't make it more credible to say, I believe these wild conspiracy charges because they're also signing statements. I don't like that. And also, there's some dispute about the interpretation of the Geneva Convention. I don't like that. All these other secondary things don't add credibility to the main sensational explosive charge. What I want to do is just remind people in looking at these secondary charges that this is not unique to this administration. It is nothing new. Let's just remind ourselves all kinds of talk about surveillance. Previous wars, right at the beginning, and indeed in the Second World War, before the beginning, the president authorized the Attorney General wiretapping as much as you like. Congresswoman Holtzman mentioned abuses that led up to the enactment of FISA. Right, they go back decades. This has been a thing that happens frequently in wartime. Chief Justice Rehnquist wrote a book, not in defense of the Bush administration. He wrote it in the 1990s about civil liberties in wartime. He tells the story about the dispute within the government about putting more than 100,000 people behind barbed wire, Japanese Americans. And he quotes the saying of the Attorney General at the time, Francis Biddle, who told the president, this is a problem, we shouldn't be doing this. And Biddle said afterwards, I do not think the constitutional difficulty plagued him, that is, plagued President Roosevelt. The Constitution has not greatly bothered any wartime president. Chief Justice Rehnquist was so impressed by those words that he not only quoted them in the section of his book about World War II, he quotes them in the last 2 pages of the book at the conclusion. Wartime presidents don't take great care about the Constitution. Wartime presidents take great care to defend the country because they think that's what they will be judged on. And Chief Justice Rehnquist wasn't making that point in criticism. He was making that point, I think, as a former, Assistant Attorney General for Legal Counsel at OLC. He knew this is what presidents do. All I'm saying is keep in mind the context of all the things that are being charged against the Bush administration. They thought of it as being wartime. We are now looking back on it 7 years later. There hasn't been another attack, so we now think, oh, really, there was no good reason for this. But people had no reason to be so confident as we are now that there isn't really much of a terror threat. If you keep that in mind, it's much more understandable how people of good faith and sincerity could do things which, in retrospect, we think maybe that was excessive and should be looked into. I want to say just one last thing before I finish, which is we should remind ourselves that we are not looking at this now as historians. There is really very deep ideological division in the country, or just partisan division in the country. I have to tell you, coming to this, it's the first time I've been in a hearing in quite a few years, I'm really astonished at the mood in this room. I mean, the tone of these deliberations, I think, is slightly demented. I'm not saying this to criticize people. I'm just saying you should all remind yourselves that the rest of the country is not necessarily in this same bubble in which people think it is reasonable to describe the president as if he were Caligula. We have reasonable differences. We ought to be able to pursue those differences without reaching for the most extreme interpretation and the most sensational way of viewing what has happened. If the Congress thinks there are things that need to be fixed, you have a legislative process. I think to put everything onto the somebody must pay for mistakes and impeachment is the way is to make the country ungovernable, because each time you start cranking this kind of extreme response, it just encourages people on the other side to get their backs up and feel, yes, they are our enemies. And our enemies are not Democrats or Republicans. Our enemies are terrorists abroad who want to kill us. Thank you.